Hey guys, thank you for joining me today. My name is Olivia Odero and I'm a licensed professional counselor. And today I wanted to talk about dealing with rejection. So, rejection is a word we get to hear commonly thrown about around where people are dealing with either it's rejection in relationships or just those feelings. Sometimes it looks like, feeling unwanted, not knowing how to fit in, or just feeling that need to prove oneself consistently. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about it from the perspective of a counselor, mental health counselor, and just give some insight into this whole thing about rejection. So we'll kind of start with the causes. So the reason I wanted to start with the causes is because nothing usually happens out of a vacuum. Like when we see people not accepting themselves or hating themselves, and so these are some of the symptoms. I'm just talking a little bit about the symptoms, like, we talking about even suicide or depression, all those things where people just feel a kind of self-hate towards themselves. It's not, it doesn't come out of a vacuum. There's usually a genesis of these things, and it's usually important to kind of have insight or an understanding of where they're coming from. So with the people I've worked with, mostly work with children. With children I've worked with and just some interactions I've had with people, some of the causes that I've realized are usually as the following. I'll name a few. So one of the things is, like, let's say a parent did not want the baby. So there's rejection at conception. These are some of the things we call unwanted pregnancy, where the parent was like, this was just unplanned. I wasn't planning on getting a child with this, intimacy. And so when the child is growing in the womb, there's just all that emotional issues going on with the mom where they totally do not want this pregnancy. So that emotional mindset can usually affect the child, even though it's not documented a lot. Science has done a lot of research to show that even though a child is still growing in the womb, most of their neurons and relational connections are already inbuilt. So whatever the parent is going through, whether they're going through depression, anxiety, whatever state of mind the parent is in, usually affects the child, because these are hormones that we're talking about. They're neurons, they're chemicals. So as they flow within the mother, they also flow within the baby, and they end up affecting the baby. So sometimes a parent may be dealing with not wanting a pregnancy, and, like, even considering abortion or even trying abortion, or even the parents themselves may be dealing with their own issues, self-rejection, where they've been rejected by their parents, dealing with this stuff. And all this emotional turbulence actually affects the child. It has been scientifically documented that it does. Those neurons, those neurochemicals affect the child. So these are some of the things that can cause a child to grow up into an adult who just has those inclinations and feeling of being rejected, not fitting in, or just doesn't know how to connect with people, and this is very general. It differs with every single person. I'm just giving a general overview over some of the mental health issues we see where people just struggle relationally. So another thing is, let's say even the child was given up for adoption. So these are just more childhood experiences that add up to this feeling of rejection that, we later see in adult life, whether they were given up for adoption, or, their parents um, tried abortion or just did not want the pregnancy. So all those things are some of the childhood experiences that start the foundations for someone who ends up in life starting to feel rejected, unwanted, unable to fit in, just having a hard time forming relationships. So now we'll go to some symptoms. So some of the symptoms that I've talked about, I mean, I've already said, people usually feel unwanted, like they just cannot explain it, but they're like, I just don't feel like those people like me. And sometimes it's intuition, but half of the time it's usually those that for rejection that has already formed, that has already been founded within the person, that is now reflecting. The person they're talking about may not even not like them necessarily. They may be just in a funk, or just, in their own world, dealing with their own stuff. But to the person who has this foundational blocks of rejection that I've talked about, they will read into that and see that people just don't like me, or I just don't fit in, or I just don't know how to do relationships, or I just, these are some of the symptoms that someone can know they're dealing with that whole thing of rejection. Or just people feeling like they don't belong. They go to different places and constantly feel like, I just don't fit in. Like, I'll just become a loner. And once again, this is very general. There's some people who have a personality tendency to be introverts. But right now, I'm just talking about like when all these things add up, when these are some foundational things that someone knows is in their life, and they're struggling with relationships, struggling with connecting, then they can usually point it to like, okay, I'm dealing with this issue of rejection. So those are some of the symptoms or some of the telltale signs, if someone wants to know, like, is this a long-standing issue that I'm having here? And then we'll go into some of the unhealthy ways that people usually try to medicate or just heal themselves. So one of the things I have down is self-protection. So self-protection is when one constantly feels like, I just have to pull away from people because I'd rather not get hurt, like I'd rather leave before I get hurt. So there's usually a lot of self-protection when people are dealing with rejection. So they draw away from relationships. Sometimes we may not understand why they're drawing away. We may not understand why they're not picking our calls anymore. We may not understand why they're not responding to us as they used to respond. And this is usually like that whole rejection coming into play. So someone is like self-protecting because what rejection does, like, it makes someone so afraid of getting into an intimate relationship, whether it's friendship or um, marriage, things like that. Like, there's just a fear that I'll be rejected, because remember, these are the foundational blocks. So whether they were rejected at conception, at birth, whatever it is, these are the foundational blocks that are working within their system. So now that they're adults, they find it quite hard to connect with people, or even to give themselves away into a relationship, because of the fear that those foundational things may be may become true. Like, it's a fear, like it's a block, a building block. So it actually does affect how people navigate through life. If someone is unaware that these are some of the things that is operating their system, they can just go in life thinking like, I just can't form good relationships. I just can't seem to connect with people. I just can't, all those things we've had people saying that, or I just don't think I'm made for relationships. So they even stop relationships and they kind of self protect. So these are some unhealthy ways that people start dealing with this thing called rejection. Another unhealthy way is giving up of oneself in order to fit in. So sometimes some people who have really felt rejected, but they really want to fit in, sometimes they try to lose their identity unknowingly, subconsciously, unconsciously. um, they lose their identity in order to feel like they can fit in with others. And that is unhealthy, because when someone loses themselves in order to fit in with someone else, then they are, quote unquote, invalidating themselves. And when we invalidate ourselves, I mean, we can only invalidate ourselves so long before the real us meets with us and is like, what are you doing? Because we'll never be able to match up to other people's expectations. But unfortunately, this is what rejection does to our system. Like, if we don't know that it is operating in our system, we just constantly find ourselves giving into things, saying yes to things we want to say no to. But it's because that need to really feel wanted, to really feel appreciated, to really feel like we belong, may start making us go into relationships or things, or saying yes to things that we need or want to say no to. So those are some of the unhealthy ways that people sometimes deal with that whole rejection feeling. So I want to talk about healthy ways that we can deal with this. And of course, this is very general. I would work one on one with someone who's dealing with this because it takes a long time. But for those people who may not be able to afford counseling or may not even understand, okay, how do I start with this? So, here are just a few things that can be very helpful. So, the first thing is understanding our past. Understanding our past is so important. Understanding, like, okay, what is my lifeline? What happened to me as a child? Because especially if we have ongoing patterns of feeling unwanted, feeling like we don't belong, feeling like we're just not seen, feeling like our voice is unheard, ongoing patterns usually tell us there is a genesis, there is a reason, there is a seed that was planted somewhere. That's why this pattern keeps on coming up. So, understanding our past is key in starting to heal healthily. Secondly, understanding the past from a place of truth. Because if we just understand our past without understanding the truth being the word of God, we can usually end up blaming others. We're like, oh, if only my, so and so did not reject me, if only so and so accepted me. But the truth is, they had their own things going on. So even if we blame them, it can never solve the situation. So it's understanding it from a perspective of truth that, okay, this is what happened, but this is what God says I am. This is who Christ has died for. So I'm no longer rejected. I'm accepted as a beloved child of God. I am, whether it was through abuse or, whatever happened in the past, looking at it from the lens of truth really is key in healing in a healthy way. So those are two things. The third thing is intentionally validating ourselves. So as human beings, it is normal to want validation. It is normal to want to belong. That's how we are created. We're created to be relational beings. So understanding that our feelings are valid is very key. People may not validate our feelings. May say, I feel hurt by what you said. Someone may be like, well, that's not a reason to get hurt. That's invalidation. So even if someone invalidates us, it's very key to validate our own self. Because when we ourselves can validate ourselves, then we can point out to people when they're invalidating us, like, you know what, even though you may not think that this is something that is important to talk about, I want to talk about it because it hurt me. This is how it affected me, and it's affecting our relationship. So it's very important to start accepting ourselves from that place of truth, because sometimes when we struggle with rejection, it's so easy to start rejecting ourselves, hating our body, hating who we are, hating our personality, hating our voice, hating anything that may come out of us because we don't see ourselves as lovable. So it's very key to start accepting ourselves and to start validating ourselves. And that can only come from a place of understanding our identity in Christ, because we are no longer accepting this person who has been rejected all these years, but we are accepting the person who Christ has said we now are as new creatures. So, guys, that's all I wanted to talk about on how to deal with rejection. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you can join me again next time on another topic on just how to deal with some of these things and seeing what God's truth reflects on these issues that we go through day in and day out. So I hope that was a blessing, and thank you so much for joining. Bye.